Before we get started, if you're into tech, hi-fi, or movies, be sure to push the subscribe button for new weekly videos. In this video, we're going to take a look at my Devastator build. Now, if you don't know what a Devastator is, check the link below, go check it out. It's a enclosure from GSG Audio for running a 21-inch sub, and it's pretty crazy. It's a fairly involved build, and this video is going to be kind of long, but if you're going to build one of these, I suggest watching this thing all the way through so you can kind of see all the ins and outs of what you need to do to be successful. Now, to get started, we're going to talk about a few areas before we actually start watching the build itself. And first up, we need to talk about drivers, then we're going to need to talk about tools a little bit, some extra bits and pieces that you're going to need, and then a couple of notes. So first, let's talk about the drivers. There are three different drivers that you can use for this. There's the BNC, the La Voce, and the Eminence. And like everything else, I've got links to those down below if you want to look at the specs for each one specifically. In this video, I'm using the Eminence driver, and there's a whole story around that. But it ended up being okay at the end. But if you want to see the drama, take a look. I think it'll be right up here. I'll have a link to the unboxing video, so you can take a look at that and see the process by which I got the driver and then kind of the drama associated with that. Now let's talk about tools and supplies. The tools and supplies that you'll need for this build are almost the same as any other GSG build. So if you've done one before, you have a good feel for it. If not, I'll run through them now. First off, you're going to need some glue. GSG recommends PL Premium. I've not used it. I'm a Tight Bond 3 guy, so that's what I used for my build. You're going to need a bunch of clamps, and you're going to need big ones for this build. And unless you're using a brad nailer, you have to have clamps for this, in my opinion. I'll have links to those below as well. You'll probably want a rubber mallet so you can move the pieces around as you need to without marring them up. I use a small carpenter square just to make sure things are all 90 degrees and nice. Then when it comes time to finish, I recommend having an orbital sander and some type of Bondo or filler that you can use for any cracks or scratches or anything else that you want to clean up before you put your finish on. Finish is going to be up to your discretion. I used spray-on Duratex, and it really worked well. But these can be finished in a million different ways. You can put veneer or laminate or roller paint or spray-on. That's going to be up to you. You're going to need some extra components, the final bits and pieces to put everything together. First and foremost is going to be the speak-on connector. You can use a regular speaker wire connector as well, but I'll have links to the speak-on that I used below. You'll need wire and all of the crimps and little bits and pieces for inside. And really the wire you need is about yay long. It's not a lot. I use 12 gauge. You can use 10. I think you can even use up to 16, but 12 has worked out really well for me, and I've not seen any problems with anyone using that before. Then you're going to also need some Spax screws and some gasket tape. I'll have links to all that stuff below as well, but that's going to be important at the very end to seal around the woofer and then seal the hatch door that goes on the back. And this build is a lot different than a mini Marty or a full Marty, because with those, the speaker kind of just goes in and you gasket around that. With this one, the speaker is actually inside of the box, so you need a speaker gasket in the front, and then when you put that panel on the back, it needs to be sealed up as well. And the last thing to note is that this is a heavy box. I strongly recommend that you tackle this with a buddy. Two people are going to make this thing a lot easier as you have to move these pieces around, flip them, and put them together. It's really heavy, and it makes it easier if you've got two people to help position things and then lock them into place with those clamps. Please hit that subscribe button and also click on the bell so that you'll be alerted for new videos as they're released. And if you like it, give me a thumbs up. If not, thumbs down's okay too. It's a small thing for you, but the number of subscribers I have is a big deal for the channel. So if you're not a subscriber, I would really appreciate that subscription. And with that, let's go ahead and get this thing started. So what we're looking at here is unpacking of the full kit. The take-home message is that there are lots of pieces. So this one is definitely more difficult than a full Marty build, but if you get a friend, you'll be able to handle it no problem. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into the build. What I'd like you to pay attention to is kind of the order that I'm doing things in through these different steps. So what you're going to see is an image from the instruction booklet so that you know what we're doing. Then what you'll see me do typically is dry fit the pieces. Then I go through the glue up and then the clamp down. And that's pretty much what I did for the whole build. You know, I'd look at the instructions, make sure I knew what I was doing. I would try it out before I put glue on, then go through the process of gluing it and clamping it. And even doing that, I made a few mistakes, and I'll call those out as we go through the video. But if you do a dry fit before you actually commit to the gluing, you'll typically be able to avoid most mistakes. Another thing that you're going to notice is that I use a few additional tools in this build that I didn't call out at the beginning of the video, and those primarily are going to be this glue brush, and if you don't have one of those, it's pretty cool to use it. This one's got some kind of rubberized tips that you can get the glue off really easy after it dries, and you can just rip it off and use this thing over and over and over, and I use that pretty much throughout the whole build. On top of that, I used a razor knife a bit to help scrape off glue, and I also discovered that using a chisel helped with some of the dry glue quite a bit. One thing I worried about quite a bit throughout the build was trying not to mark up all of these pieces on the concrete. So that's why you see me putting towels down and putting this stuff up on tires. I also discovered that when clamping, it's really great to be able to get the clamps under the bottom of this thing. And if you have it sitting on the floor, it's almost impossible to do. So if you can find some way to get it off the ground, whether you're using a table or tires like I used, it'll be a big help. Now, this thing gets heavy, so if you're trying to lift it up to put it on a workbench, that could be a problem. So something a little bit lower might be better. One thing to reiterate here is that precision with the clamping and gluing of pieces, especially the ones where you're making things double thick, is really, really important, because what you're going to have to end up doing is sinking these pieces down into the other pieces. And if you have this stuff off a bit, it's just not going to fit well. So take time, and as you can see, I'm checking every edge to make sure that everything is nice and flush. So check everything, check it twice before you clamp it down and let it dry. As you can see here, one of the things that you're going to have to do is clean off dried glue, and that's where the chisel and the razor knife really come in handy. If you have dried glue that's on the ends, it's going to make things poke out and not fit the way that it ought to. And if you don't have dried glue, that means you probably didn't use enough, and it didn't squeeze out when you clamp things together. So just expect that you're going to have dried glue that you need to scrape off. So if you don't have a razor knife or a chisel or something, now's a good time to pick one up. Installing piece number 2 might be one where you want to take some extra steps that I did not. So what happens is once everything's all built, you can very easily see that engraved number 2 from outside of the enclosure, once it's done. So if you want to improve the aesthetics of the box, Before you install it, I would suggest taking Bondo or filler and go ahead and fill that number 2, let it dry and sand it down, so that once everything's built and you paint it, it'll look like a smooth surface. Otherwise, you will be able to see this number 2 from outside of the enclosure if you take a close look. What we're building with these pieces is really the inside guts of the horn, or maybe the band pass enclosure, however you want to think of it. So this is actually the chamber that the subwoofer is going to play into, right? So if their subwoofer was mounted now, it would be on the bottom side of that circle, firing straight up, and it fires into the chamber that's going to be made with these 2 cross beams that we're installing, and there'll be a front piece that that creates the very front of the box. So this is part of the magic of the enclosure design. Another thing that you're going to see me do in a lot of these different build phases is add glue to all of the internal joints, right? So I'll put glue on, like you're seeing here, on the edges, and I'll clamp everything down. But then I often come back and then just add more glue around all of the edges. The subwoofer inside of this enclosure creates a huge amount of energy, and you want to make sure that absolutely nothing can move inside of this box. So if you can add glue to any joint, I recommend that you absolutely do it. It won't hurt. It can only help. Fitting this side piece was really difficult for me. You know, I have a lot of footage that I cut out where I was trying to figure out how to make this thing go on. You know, things are off by just like a 16th or 1/8 or something, just a very small amount. So it was kind of difficult to get on there. So, you know, I ended up using the mallet and some clamps and stuff to move stuff around so that it would actually pop on. So the tolerances get pretty close here, so try and dry fit everything so that you know when you have a piece that's sticking, so that you don't put glue on prematurely and get yourself into trouble. So just dry fit and give yourself time, and make sure you know how things are going to fit together before you commit to the glue. At this point, this enclosure is getting really heavy, and as you saw there, I had to have my wife come help me move this thing around. So there's a lot of moving and things that aren't necessarily in frame where I have had help. So it looks like I might be doing most of this by myself, but that's not true at all. I've had tons of help moving this thing around. what we're building here is the guts of the back of the enclosure. So if you had just a standard ported box, these braces are going into the part of the box that would just be like the regular back part of a ported enclosure. So you have this woofer mounted inside of this box, and this is on the back side of the woofer on the magnet side, and there'll be a port that lets that additional sound energy out of the front, and that port is located just underneath the larger opening for the horn or the band pass piece. So yeah, there's a lot going on inside of this enclosure. So you guys get to see a lot of my garage in this video, and if you take a look there, you can see the crates that my Stark Sound speakers came in. They're pretty cool. Fitting this piece is another example of where things didn't all line up just perfectly. So I actually had to use that clamp reversed to bow the sides out just a little bit so I could get this piece to fit in, and then I could hammer it down. So this is where you get to decide if you're going to use speak-on connectors or just regular banana plug style. I like to use speak-on for all of my subwoofers, well, my DIY stuff anyway. I really like the cables, and I like being able to be sure that things aren't going to come unplugged. So if you use that little insert and glue it in like I just did, that allows you to easily mount the speak-on connector. And this step is one where I really screwed up bad. So if you look at that piece, you can see that there's glue all over it already. That's because I glued it in upside down, right? So I put it in backwards. Luckily, I figured that out before things had dried, and I was able to hammer it out. And yeah, once you get this thing in there, and if you let it dry, it's in forever. So be careful on that step. Now this step isn't in the instructions, and it's not required, but I wanted to really get my edges as smooth as I possibly could. So I used filler pretty much all around the outside of this box, and then sanded it off so that everything was really super smooth. And it also kind of helps with paint absorption on those edges if you've got something covering them up. A really good alternative that I didn't use here is to do a glue and water mix on those cut edges of the MDF so that the MDF doesn't absorb so much paint, so it makes it easier to paint. So that's another thing you can do. Also, if you notice around that speak-on connector, it comes out of the box, so to speak, not quite flush. So I'm doing it right there. I sanded that whole thing down so the back panel is completely smooth. And now for paint. So I'm not going to go into the painting in this video because that's a whole video in and of itself, but I used Duratex with a little bit of water, and it's the spray grade Duratex with a really cheap paint gun that I got from Harbor Freight, and a air compressor that I already had. And I am no master of painting by any stretch of the imagination, but I was able to get a pretty good finish, and this is way better than rolling on Duratex. And also getting inside of those ports is really tough, so you want to pay a lot of attention there. Now it's time for the fun stuff, installing the driver and getting the back panel on. So you need to make sure that you have a good seal between the driver and the two chambers. So I'm just using weather stripping, and you'll need to use that around where the driver mounts, and then also around where you're going to mount the back hatch for the whole enclosure. And that's what I'm doing here. This is where the back hatch is going to mount on. And the thin stuff that I have is some Parts Express speaker gaskets, specifically sold and very expensive for this purpose. And then the larger brown stuff is just some weather stripping that I got at Home Depot. One step that you don't want to skip is pre-drilling your holes. So make sure you follow the instruction manual on the drill bit size and the depth that you need to drill for this enclosure. It's super important. Otherwise, you're going to end up cracking this MDF and you'll be super sad. So don't skip the pre-drilling, and you need to pre-drill every hole on this back hatch, and then every hole that you're going to use to mount the speaker. Be very careful when you put this speaker into the cabinet. It's super magnet heavy, meaning that it wants to flip over. So you're likely to be putting it in just like I did, cone down with the magnet pointing up. And just be careful, because it absolutely wants to flip that magnet down. It's really heavy and it's way out there. A common question people have is, what size speaker wire should I use inside of the box? I've used 12 gauge for every subwoofer build that I've done, and it's been absolutely sufficient. You could try 10 or even bigger if you want to, but I don't think there's really any value in that other than just spending a lot of money on cable. So I just started making those little custom cables and attaching to the speak-on connector myself. So very straightforward. and nobody's ever going to see this, so it doesn't have to be pretty, but I still like it to be pretty, and I use shrink wrap and other things on there just to make sure nothing comes apart. And that is how you build a Devastator. If you're working on your own build, hopefully it's been helpful to watch mine kind of start to finish. And if you're thinking about one, hopefully this helps push you over the edge. You know, it's not that hard to build this thing. Doesn't require a lot of tools, and if you've got a friend, it's really, really easy. Now, this was the build video, and we had done the subwoofer unboxing video before, and next we're going to do the performance video. This is where we pull out REW, take measurements, and see what the curve looks like. You know, how much bass does it really put out at 20 hertz as opposed to 60 hertz, right? This is supposed to be a mid-bass monster, but everyone wants low bass in their home theater, and you know, you're talking 20 hertz, you know, 30 hertz and down. So we're going to see what this thing can do. Remember, when you set this up, you still have to have a high pass filter to protect it against those low frequencies, you know, making the sub go crazy and killing itself. And then also, you need to bump up 20 hertz on this to make the curve a little bit more flat. And we'll talk about all those settings in the next video. So thanks for watching. Please take a moment and hit that subscribe button. And if you've liked it, thumbs up. And if you don't like it, well, thumbs up. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day. And I look forward to helping you guys with more videos in the future.